I was watching someone in a performance review the other day. Wasn't even going bad, The feedback was standard stuff, mostly positive, maybe one or two minor areas for growth. But I noticed this shift. The manager said something really mild, just need to be more proactive on the cross-team comms. That was it. And this person I was watching, they just nodded, kept that fixed professional smile, but I saw their knuckles go white where they gripped their pen. And I saw their breathing change. It went from normal, relaxed, to this quick, shallow thing right at the top of their chest. Even as they said, yep, understood, thanks for that, they weren't really in the room anymore. You could tell they were already 3 hours in the future, replaying that one single line, stacking it up against every other time they felt they'd fallen short, comparing themselves to someone else. They were still smiling and nodding, but they'd completely drifted away from themselves. And in that gap, you could almost see them starting to carve that invisible wound.
Yeah, that observation it's incredibly powerful because it just nails the core mechanism, doesn't it? Performance anxiety driven by needing that external validation. That moment you described, the dissociation where the body locks up and the mind just spirals. It isn't actually about the feedback itself, not really.
Right.
It's about the sudden, overwhelming focus on the judgment of others. The internal world just collapses because the only thing that feels like it matters is how they're being seen from the outside.
Yeah.
It's the total opposite of being present.
And that feeling, the white knuckles, the shallow breathing, that sense of carving an invisible wound, that's exactly what we're trying to get into today. We've been looking at this really profound Japanese concept that seems designed to counteract that exact mechanism. It's about moving away from that external critical gaze and finding, a quiet internal truth instead.
Right. So we're starting with a deep dive into that internal repair mechanism. It's known as Go-Jiai, and it really emphasizes inner attention and authentic self-connection. We'll investigate its potential, as a culturally resonant framework for promoting well-being and maybe even preventing burnout, especially in really demanding settings.
Okay, but then we're taking a pretty sharp turn, a fascinating one. If Go-Jiai is this highly refined philosophical path to inner peace, we're then going to look at the historical, completely unfiltered, and often, frankly, outrageous expression of the human experience in Japan.
Which is?
The body, humorous poetry, known as senryu, from the 18th to 19th centuries. We're essentially mapping two mirrors reflecting the Japanese psyche.
Yeah.
The high demand for internal ethical refinement on one side, and the hilarious, coarse reality of the human body on the other.
A real contrast.
So let's start with the remedy for that spiraling anxiety we talked about. Go-Jiai, the term, it roughly focuses on genuine care or self-regard, right?
That's right. And it comes with this powerful core mission, living not for the eyes of others, but for the quiet truth within your own. It immediately pulls the attention away from that performance review, from the external judge, and back to the self.
That inward focus seems like the crucial distinction.
It really is. When we look into using this as a potential framework for employee well-being, particularly in those high-pressure corporate environments, say in Japan or even elsewhere, we see it's intended to prevent burnout by fundamentally shifting the motivational structure.
How so?
Well, instead of running on that kind of unsustainable fuel of pleasing the manager or the client or whoever, you're fostering an authentic connection with yourself. You're building an internal compass, basically, something that tells you when your limit has been reached, regardless of what the external pressure is saying.
And what's fascinating is that this isn't just theory anymore. We're seeing these principles actually being integrated into contemporary mindfulness-based stress reduction programs.
That's a really important development. It's moving beyond just generalized meditation and into specific actionable concepts from Go-Jiai. The core techniques that are often highlighted are inward attention and present moment savoring.
Okay, let's break those down. Inward attention. How does that directly counter the white knuckle scenario?
Well, think about it. When the manager gives that minor critique, the immediate reflex is to jump outside yourself, right? To see yourself through their potentially critical eyes. Inward attention is the deliberate practice of returning to your own bodily reality in that moment, your breath, the feeling of your feet on the floor, maybe the sound of your own quiet breathing.
So it stops that external spiral.
It aims to, yeah, instantly, or at least quickly. It anchors you back in yourself.
And then present moment savoring. That sounds pleasant. How does that work in a stressful situation?
It connects to concepts like ajiwa, which is often translated as the Japanese art of deeply appreciating and savoring the moment. It's a conscious slowing down. We often think of savoring with food, like really tasting something. But here, it's about savoring the internal landscape, maybe. Even in a stressful meeting, can you find something to savor? Maybe just the simple fact that you are sitting there, you are breathing, you exist outside of that perceived crisis.
Just noticing that you are present, even if the situation isn't ideal.
Exactly. And this practice aims for enhanced mental well-being and, importantly, genuine self-compassion. It's about accepting the moment, including your reaction to it as it is. It also connects, I think, to tokimeki, which people might know as sparking joy.
Oh, right, from Marie Kondo.
Yeah, but while it got famous in the context of tidying, fundamentally, tokimeki is a Japanese perspective on emotional living that really values inner resonance. Does this moment, this feeling, this object truly align with your inner state? It's like a little litmus test for authenticity.
Okay, so let's do that comparative analysis. How does Go-Jiai, with its inward focus and savoring, stack up against common Western self-care ideas? Because, in the West, self-care often feels very commercialized.
That's a key difference, absolutely.
Yeah.
Western self-care frequently involves consumption or external activities.
Oh.
The spa day, the fancy vacation, buying yourself something nice. It often provides temporary relief.
And sometimes it feels like a reward for performing well, right? Like you worked hard, now you deserve this expensive treat. It still keeps the focus on achievement.
Precisely. It can maintain that high-achieving standard, just giving you a break from it. Go-Jiai, on the other hand, feels much more non-transactional and non-performative. It emphasizes returning to your own breath, your inner truth. It's an internal recalibration that doesn't require spending money or achieving some new status symbol of relaxation.
So it sounds like Western self-care often says you deserve a break from the performance, whereas Go-Jiai suggests your performance is actually secondary to your authentic internal presence.
That's a really good way to put it. That sums up the cultural nuance beautifully. It fosters this gentle self-awareness in a global context that constantly demands external validation. It's almost like a quiet act of cultural rebellion against always having to maintain that hyper-polite, hyper-productive exterior. It demands you acknowledge your own inner needs first. It's about building a more robust psychological baseline, maybe.
That distinction, the internal presence versus the hyper-polite exterior, that feels like the perfect hinge point for our deep dive.
Yeah.
Because if Go-Jiai is the quiet, refined, modern path to inner truth, we have to ask, where, historically, did the Japanese psyche kind of vent?
Yeah.
Where did they put all this stuff that couldn't possibly be polite?
Right. Where was the cultural counterbalance to this highly refined exterior?
Exactly.
And the answer, somewhat shockingly perhaps, is found in the dirty themes of 18th and 19th century senri poetry. It's a jarring pivot, from gentle breathing exercises to the raw, visceral reality of Edo period life.
Okay, so senri, first off, it's not haiku,
Yeah.
right? People might confuse them because of the structure.
Definitely not haiku. Haiku is all about contemplation, nature, refined beauty, suggestion. Senri, on the other hand, it's known as light verse, specifically from the ukiyo, the floating world. It seems the Japanese language back then lacked a single generic term for poetry, but senri very much occupied the lowbrow space. It was dedicated to human flaws, hypocrisy, bodily functions, just reality.
And the descriptions we have of these poems, they're quite something.
They really are. The sources use this whole taxonomy of vulgarity, erotic, lewd, obscene, pornographic, ribald, scurrilous. It covers the whole spectrum. The translator we looked at ultimately chose the simple, quite unaffected English word dirty because, as they put it, it boasted a pedigree with no inherent class pretensions.
Dirty, just straightforward.
Yeah. This was the poetry of the common, everyday, often messy, promiscuous snatch of human existence.
And this kind of raw self-mockery, it was apparently seen as quintessentially Japanese. There's this idea that self-denigration is Taihen Japanese, extremely Japanese.
That's fascinating, isn't it? It suggests that the refined politeness of the surface culture, the absolute necessity of maintaining tanmei, the public face, required an equally vigorous, sometimes grotesque counterbalance in the arts. The hun, the true feelings, had to come out somewhere.
And senri provided that outlet.
It seems so. And when you look at the structure, the 5-7-5 syllable count, you see how it works differently than in haiku. Haiku uses that structure for spaciousness, for implication. Senri uses it for punch, for immediate, often shocking wit.
Like a setup and a punchline, almost, in 17 syllables.
Exactly. The constraint forces the poet to deliver the joke, or the tragic observation, or the vulgar image with incredible speed. There's simply no room for politeness or beating around the bush.
Which must make translating it incredibly difficult, especially trying to preserve the wit.
Oh, immensely challenging. The translator's philosophy wasn't about literal word-for-word translation. It couldn't be. The goal was, and I'm quoting roughly here, to reincarnate the poetry in new bodies equally appealing, though little like the original. The primary aim was preserving that crucial, often coarse wit.
How do you even begin to do that?
Well, it's complex because the humor is often multi-layered. It relies heavily on puns, slang, cultural allusions that just vanish if you translate them flatly into English.
Oh.
For instance, there's a term takimachi, which means instantly. But in a senryu about an erection, it carries the double meaning of stand or erect tachi.
Ah, okay.
And the poem might also allude to the ideal type of manhood at the time, large glands, upcurved, which was symbolized by the pine mushroom, the matsutake.
So you've got a mushroom, an erection, and a pun on instantly, all crammed into 5 syllables.
Exactly. Try translating that literally. You get something either completely baffling or just bland. You lose the specific, rude joke about the ideal dick being like a luxury mushroom popping up instantly. The translator often had to resort to using multiple English versions of a single ku just to try and capture some of the ambiguity or the different layers of meaning.
Right. You'd almost need footnotes for every poem.
Or just accept that you're capturing the spirit, the wit, rather than the exact linguistic mechanics.
So the audacity of Senryo. Where did it start? It seems like they spared absolutely no one, right? Even going right to the top.
Right to the very top. They dove deep into the most scandalous historical figures, starting with the imperial court itself. It's quite breathtaking, really.
Who's the main target there?
The key figure that comes up repeatedly is Empress Kukin, who later reigned again as Empress Shotoku. She had this incredibly famous, scandalous historical relationship with a Buddhist monk, a bonze named Duki.
A monk.
A monk, yes, and apparently a very well-endowed one. He became her lover, and because of this relationship, he rose to, frankly, dizzying heights of court status.
And the Senri poets, they just ran with this.
They treated Dush's defining feature, his massive penis, his mara, as a kind of national spectacle. The descriptions are legendary, pushing hyperbole way past its limits. Poems suggested Dush's cock reached clear to heaven on heaven's shore, or that it was a cock that refuses to die. Just incredible stuff.
Wow.
And this wasn't just, locker room humor. It was political commentary wrapped up in vulgarity. There was this infamous anecdote that circulated, which the Senri loved to capture. It suggested that when Juki's enormous mara was erect and he was sitting down, it was so tall that children could literally play peekaboo or his lap.
You're kidding.
Apparently not. The sheer scale of his alleged sexual presence became this comical, almost unbelievable monument right there in the most sacred, rarefied part of the country.
But the poets didn't just focus on the male side of things. What about the empress?
No, they didn't stop there. They documented the empress's supposed insatiability. Even the monumental Dukyu apparently could only come once, leaving her wanting more.
Okay. So what was the solution, according to these poems?
The solution, according to these gleeful 17-syllable verses, was a dildo. Specifically, a large, bumpy yam called Yamato Imo.
Oh, yeah.
A yam. Think about the symbolism. The highest power in the land, the empress herself, supposedly resorting to a root vegetable. And the description of this yam dildo is startlingly physical. It was said to be long, often thicker than a horse's member, slightly bumpy, and, crucially, when you grated or rubbed it, it produced this abundant white slime.
Oh, my goodness.
It's the ultimate juxtaposition, isn't it? The refined court life crashing headfirst into the utterly unrefined, visceral, almost desperate pursuit of physical release. It brings the empress right down to the level of, say, a lonely chambermaid, which we'll get to.
Incredible. Okay, so from the palace, where did the satire go next? The clergy seem like obvious targets.
Exactly. Buddhist monks, the bonzes, were frequent targets. They were often satirized for hypocrisy or their alleged involvement in things like prostitution and sodomy. And there was the specific delight the poets took in intertwining the sacred and the profane through wordplay.
How did that work?
Well, this is where the cultural context is just vital. Names for Buddhist clergy were apparently frequently co-opted and used as slang for the penis. For instance, kozo meant small monk, but became a phallic term. Nudu, which means enterpath or novice, was used in a similar way.
So the language itself blurred the lines.
Precisely. And the poets found immense humor in exposing perceived hypocrisy. There's one famous senryu that points out the irony that a kagema tea room, which functioned basically as a boy brothel, was operated by the pure word sect, the Shingon-shu. This wasn't some obscure sect. It's a major, highly respected Buddhist faith founded by the famous Kubo Daishi. The juxtaposition was inherently funny and scandalous.
And this leads us straight into the topic of pederasty and these kajima, the boy brothels.
Yes. Historically, pederasty was often associated with samurai pages and Buddhist priests in Japan. But the senris seem to focus more on the commercial aspects and the sometimes pitiful ironies of the kigima's life.
What kind of ironies?
Well, the material shows us the sort of institutional complexities around it. There's one example given of a clerk in a large commercial house who finds himself struggling to scold a boy he had, engaged with sexually.
Why is that ironic?
Because the shop itself actively discouraged clerks from interacting with women. They believed women led to distraction, poor budgeting, romantic complications, bad for business. So they inadvertently encouraged homosexual relations among the staff, creating these impossible social dynamics where the workplace enforced strict moral constraints regarding one gender while sort of implicitly opening the door to relations with another. It's quite a tangle, #tag way of it. The physical realities of Edo life.
Okay, so stepping away from the scandalous elites and the clergy, the senri also give us this astonishingly raw, unromanticized look at just the everyday physical realities and taboos of Edo life. Let's start with menstruation. They called it moon duty, right?
Yes, moon duty. Tsuki no sawari, literally lunar hindrance. The name itself clearly reflected the taboo of impurity, which had really strong roots in Shinto beliefs and also in some Buddhist sects. This often led to women being physically segregated during their period.
But the senri didn't focus on the religious aspect so much.
Not primarily. They focused more on the domestic reality, the practicalities. We learn about some surprising remedies, for instance, the use of tobacco. Tobacco had only been introduced a couple of centuries earlier, but it was apparently used as a coagulant, something to try and stem the bleeding during menstruation.
Wow. That highlights the practical, maybe even crude methods people use to manage the physical symptoms of something under such intense cultural taboo.
Exactly. And the humor around marital intimacy during moon duty often centered on this rigid adherence to calendar rules. Husbands would sometimes stick strictly to a predetermined 7-day break, apparently, regardless of the woman's actual flow, just to maintain that ritual avoidance.
Or the women could use it strategically.
Right. Wives might use the taboo as a convenient excuse to avoid sex altogether. So a ritual requirement becomes a tool for exerting a bit of control in the relationship. It tells you a lot about the potential lack of intimacy or open communication in some marriages.
The poems also seem to give us unique insights into women's private lives, especially around masturbation and dildos.
Yes, particularly concerning chambermaids, who were known as nagatsubon. They were strongly associated with this practice in the poems. And the dildos themselves, they weren't flimsy things. They were often crafted from durable materials like ox bone or tortoise shell.
And the jokes were about quality.
Quality and permanence, yeah. There's a line from a chambermaid boasting about her everlasting pecker, manen mo mochiru hinoko, or claiming, mine is good old-fashioned craftsmanship. There's a profound loneliness embedded in that too, isn't there? The inanimate object becomes this source of private satisfaction, maybe even pride. One senri captures this private moment, a chambermaid apparently in soliloquy saying, that's the spot, to her sex aide. It's incredibly intimate in a way.
Okay, this leads us to one of the most culturally specific conditions detailed in this senri, like the dry kidney man, the ukiyo. What was that about?
This was described as a kind of psychosomatic illness supposedly afflicting sex-addicted husbands. The belief, the folk medicine idea, was that they had literally dried up their vital juices, their kidney energy, essentially by overspending themselves sexually.
So it's like the Edo-era medicalization of male sexual anxiety or maybe performance issues.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. The symptom of the Jinkyo man was cruelly ironic. He apparently possessed the tenacity, the shinin, the mental desire, and desperately wanted to fuck forever, as the poems put it. But his body suffered from placidity.
Oh, the irony.
Exactly. The poet suggests his imagination and his erection had become disconnected. His semper paratus, his always ready, got the message too late. It reads like a cultural warning against excess framed as a physical disease.
And there was a final insult after death. That sounds grim.
It's both shocking and darkly hilarious. A Jinkyo man could apparently die with an erection. Now, this was a practical nightmare because traditional Japanese coffins were often tub-shaped, requiring the body to be positioned with bent limbs.
Right, you can't fit up.
Exactly. So to make the body pliable for burial, the crying, grieving wife was forced to throw sand onto his erect penis. And not just any sand, specifically sand blessed by the esoteric Buddhist pure word sect. the Shingon-shu again.
The sacred sand
Yes.
on his guy.
Yes. The sacred sand, intended to soften the rigid member and prepare him properly for burial, became the final indignity layered onto a life defined by this specific kind of sexual anxiety and perceived excess. It's quite a scene. #tag V. The concept of matching and ideal body types.
Okay, moving on to intimacy standards. The Senri seem to confirm that size definitely mattered back then, but maybe not in the way we think. And the ideal was size matching.
Yes, size matching was apparently a significant ideal, aligning with principles you might find in texts like the Kama Sutra. It was about compatibility.
And this ideal led to some unusual public practices, like the market of fronts. What was that?
It sounds almost unbelievable, doesn't it? But yes, the market of fronts, mei no ichi, was apparently a specific historical custom. Youths and maidens who were of marriageable age would literally lift their hems or robes and display their genitals to one another. In a specific context, yes. The goal was purely pragmatic, to find compatible sizes before marriage. It was like a sexual pre-screening process. Large cocks were looking for wide cunts, and women described as small fronts, having tiny vaginas, were seeking partners with tiny peckers.
Wow. That strips away all the romance, doesn't it? Purely utilitarian physical compatibility.
Completely. It tells you a lot about the practicalities that sometimes govern marriage arrangements, and the preferences for shape and size were also incredibly specific, sometimes running counter to modern, maybe Western assumptions.
Like what?
Well, apparently long cocks were actually thought poorly of, or at least not ideal. The desirable standard was often described as a Go-Jiai cock, meaning short and thick. It seems proportion and shape were valued, perhaps over sheer length.
Interesting. And the Senri use metaphors for female anatomy, too.
Oh, absolutely. Rich, often quite ludicrous metaphors. One term that really stands out is the octopussy, which comes from takotsubo, the traditional clay pot used to catch octopuses.
Okay. So what does that imply about the vagina?
It suggested a vagina with immense gripping ability, something capable of retaining and satisfying any penis, no matter the size. It implies power, depth, maybe even a bit dangerous, like the octopus pot itself.
But that wasn't the most common one.
No, the most common metaphor seems to have been the relatively gentler vulvic clam, or hamaguri. It's a common image. But even here, there was absolutely no filter. They discussed postpartum anatomy with blunt honesty. There are poems suggesting that the vagina was actually improved after childbirth.
Improved? How?
Best outfitted with zumotsu, which means miscellany or furniture, basically. The idea seems to be that the process of birth somehow made the woman better equipped or her anatomy more accommodating for subsequent sexual pleasure. It's a very pragmatic physical view.
Definitely not romanticized.
Not at all. And finally, what really anchors the Senri as this document of unfiltered truth is its absolute refusal to shy away from the truly universal, unavoidable human stuff. Basic bodily functions. Humor around farts and pissing was treated with surprising, sometimes elaborate detail. And these functions were often used as metaphors for spiritual failure, or social anxiety, or just plain awkwardness.
The lack of refinement is really the defining feature, isn't it?
Totally. Think of the example of the woman trying to sound feminine while she's pissing, that moment of acute self-consciousness being totally destroyed by a natural bodily function, captured in just 17 syllables. Or the staggering irony of a magistrate's fart being officially recorded in the court logbook because his flatulence was considered part of his august illness.
A fart is part of an official record.
Exactly. It demonstrates the ultimate leveling mechanism of Senri. If the Empress is potentially using a yam dildo and the highest legal authority's gas is considered official history, well, then the poems succeed. They show that underneath all the layers of politeness and ceremony and hierarchy, there's this fundamental, raw, often ridiculous human core shared by absolutely everyone. #tag outro. So we've really traversed the extremes of the Japanese cultural landscape today, haven't we? From the refined, internal demand for gentle self-connection we see in Go-Jiai.
Right, that quiet inward turn.
All the way to the historical, unblinking embrace of humanity's coarse, physical reality, documented so vividly, so dirtily in Senri.
And the essential thread connecting them, it seems to me, despite the centuries between them and the wildly different subject matter, is authenticity. Or maybe the struggle for it.
What do you mean?
Well, that initial anxiety you observed in the performance review, the white knuckles, the shallow breath, the spiraling self-criticism, that stems entirely from measuring yourself against an external, polite, probably impossible standard of perfection. You're judging your messy internal landscape against some pristine, polished facade.
I see what you're saying. And the centenary stands as this incredible historical document proving that that pristine facade was always a facade, maybe even a lie. It reminds us that at the heart of even the most highly ceremonial and polite culture, there's a fundamental, raw, and often utterly ludicrous human experience bubbling underneath.
Yeah, one where powerful monks apparently have spectacular genitals.
Empresses might seek release with yams.
And esteemed men suffer from imaginary kidney failure and die with inconvenient erections.
Exactly. This reality is fundamentally imperfect and maybe gloriously messy.
So perhaps the quiet truth within yourself, the self-compassion that Go-Jiai asks you to return to, maybe it's simply about recognizing and accepting that unfiltered, flawed, sometimes crude, sometimes funny human reality in yourself.
Instead of chasing external perfection.
Right. The goal isn't achieving that flawless external performance. Maybe the goal is recognizing that your own beautiful, complicated, sometimes messy internal landscape is already the truth. And it's far more interesting and definitely much more honest than the perfect version you were trying and failing to perform for everyone else.